I didn't know my marriage had already ended the moment my best friend walked into the garage with that look on his face, the one people get when they're about to ruin your life and they know it. I was standing over an open engine bay, grease on my hands, sweat at the base of my neck, doing what I'd done for most of my adult life, fixing things that other people had broken. Cars made sense to me. They failed for reasons. There were causes, solutions. If you listened closely enough, they told you what was wrong. Marriage, apparently, did not. Tony stood near the entrance of Hollander Auto Repair, not cracking a joke, not leaning against the tool rack like he always did. Just standing there, stiff, like someone had drained the humor out of him. "Paige," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I laughed. I actually laughed. "What is it this time? Did you wreck another customer's car? Because if Mrs. Patterson's Buick is totaled again, I'm making you pay for it." He didn't smile. That's when my stomach dropped. "It's about Daniel," he said. The wrench in my hand suddenly felt too heavy, like gravity had doubled just to mess with me. "What about my husband?" Tony pulled out his phone, hesitated, then unlocked it with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. "I was at Murphy's Tavern last night," he said. "You know, the downtown place. The one where a burger costs more than an oil change?" I nodded slowly. "The place Daniel said he was having dinner with his brother?" "Yeah," Tony said. "Well, unless his brother suddenly got taller, richer, and started going by the name Victoria, your husband wasn't there with family." He turned the phone toward me. And just like that, the world tilted. There was Daniel, my husband of 15 years, sitting on another woman's lap like the vows we'd spoken were a joke someone else had written. His head was thrown back in laughter, my laugh, the one I hadn't heard in months. Her hands were on his waist, possessive, familiar. The woman was tall, well-dressed, expensive in a way you couldn't fake. "Who's the suit?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Victoria Dantas," Tony said. "Owns that luxury car dealership on 5th, the one with the Porsches that cost more than your house." I stared at the photo until it burned itself into my memory. Daniel looked happy, not pretending, not tired, not distracted. Happy. That was the part that shattered me. I handed the phone back, picked up my wrench, and tightened a bolt far harder than necessary. "I'm fine," I said. I wasn't. But for the first time in a long while, I could finally see the truth. Something in my marriage had been broken for a long time, and I was about to decide whether it was worth fixing or whether it needed to be scrapped entirely. If you'd asked me a year ago whether my marriage was in trouble, I would have said no without hesitation. Not because it was perfect, but because it was familiar. And familiarity has a way of disguising decay. I'm Paige Hollander. I was 39 when everything fell apart, though parts of it had been crumbling quietly for years. I owned a small auto repair shop just outside Cleveland, the same one I'd inherited from my father after he passed. Grease under my nails, calluses on my palms, a body shaped by long hours and honest labor. I'd learned early that stability wasn't glamorous, but it kept you alive. Daniel was different. We met when I was 24, back when my shop was barely surviving and his ambition was larger than both of us combined. He worked in corporate HR, wore pressed shirts even on weekends, and spoke about growth trajectories like they were destiny instead of buzzwords. He liked that I was grounded. I liked that he dreamed. At least, that's what we told ourselves. We dated for 3 years, married in a small ceremony with too many relatives and not enough air conditioning. 15 years later, we were still together, on paper. Still sharing a house, shared bank accounts, shared history. What we didn't share anymore was direction. Daniel wanted more money, more recognition, more polish. And slowly, so slowly I didn't notice at first, I became something he stepped over on his way there. At the beginning, he used to brag about me. "My wife owns her own business," he'd tell people. "She's tough as hell." Later, the wording changed. "She's practical. She likes simple things. She doesn't really care about the corporate scene." Those were the first warning signs. I ignored them. I ignored the way he started coming home later, ignored how his phone never left his hand, ignored how family dinners became obligations instead of conversations. His family didn't help. They were polite, but distant. His mother liked me best when I stayed quiet. His brother once joked that I'd married above my station, then laughed like it was harmless. Daniel didn't defend me. That should have told me something. Instead, I worked harder, tried to be easier, tried not to ask questions that made him sigh. We didn't fight much. That was the lie I told myself. We just stopped talking. So when Tony showed me that photo, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like confirmation, because the truth was, I'd already been alone for a long time. I just hadn't known how alone until I saw my husband happy in someone else's arms. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact season my marriage started to rot. It wasn't a single moment. It was a collection of small, forgettable things, tiny cracks I kept sealing with denial because I didn't want to believe the foundation was failing. It started with Daniel's clothes. One day, he came home with a new jacket. Dark, fitted, the kind of fabric that didn't belong in our practical little house. He hung it in the closet like it was sacred. New work thing, he said when I asked. Some executive dinner. I need to look the part. I nodded, because that made sense. Because I was his wife. Because wives nod. Then it was the cologne. Daniel had never been a cologne man. He smelled like laundry detergent and office air conditioning. Suddenly, the hallway would fill with something sharp and expensive whenever he walked past me. I remember teasing him, trying to keep it light. Who are you? He didn't smile back. People at work, he said. It matters. That word, matters, hit me harder than it should have. Because the unspoken part felt obvious. This matters. You don't. After that, little changes became routine. He started working late at least twice a week. Started taking calls outside. Started flipping his phone screen down the second I entered a room. If I asked, he'd sigh like I was making life harder for him. Paige, don't do this. Like my questions were the betrayal, not his behavior. I tried to talk to him once, really talk. It was a Tuesday night, and I'd stayed open late at the shop to finish a Civic timing belt. I came home tired, smelling like motor oil and hot metal, and found him at the kitchen counter scrolling his phone with a faint smile on his face. What are you smiling at? I asked casually, trying not to sound like I was clawing for reassurance. Daniel, just a meme, he said. I waited. He didn't show me. That silence was louder than any confession. Then came Murphy's Tavern became his favorite phrase. Like the name of that place was a shield. Dinner at Murphy's, he'd say, grabbing his keys. Client thing. How late? I'd ask. He'd already be halfway out the door. Don't wait. At first, I cooked anyway. I'd make his favorite, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, that garlic bread he used to inhale like he couldn't get enough of anything I touched. I'd set the table for two, even if I pretended it was just habit. The food would go cold. The table would look stupid. Eventually, I stopped setting 2 plates. That should have been my wake-up call. But the worst part wasn't the late nights. It was how he treated me in the small moments. The way his eyes slid past me like I was furniture. The way he corrected my words in front of people. The way he stopped touching me. No hand at my waist. No casual kiss on my temple. No warmth. Once, I tried to reach for his hand in the grocery store. He pulled away so fast it felt like I'd burned him. Not here, he muttered. Why? I asked, confused. He didn't answer. Just pushed the cart forward, jaw tight, like my affection embarrassed him. I went quiet for the rest of the trip, swallowing humiliation like it was something women were built to digest. Tony noticed before I did. He'd come by the shop after closing sometimes, leaning against the tool bench with a beer, watching me work. You and Daniel okay? He asked one night, carefully. I laughed it off because that's what I do when I don't want to cry. Of course, I said. Marriage is just busy. Tony didn't look convinced. Busy is one thing, he said. Cold is another. I snapped at him then. Don't start analyzing my life, I told him, sharper than I meant. You don't know what it's like. Tony held up his hands in surrender, but his eyes stayed serious. I'm just saying, he murmured. You deserve someone who looks at you like you're the best part of their day. I rolled my eyes, but the words stuck under my skin like a splinter. And then there was Marcy Peterson. Daniel started mentioning her casually, too casually. Marcy said this. Marcy thinks that. Marcy invited us. Marcy worked with him. The kind of woman who laughed too loud and touched people's arms when she talked. The kind of woman who always seemed slightly drunk even when she wasn't. I asked Daniel once, light and teasing again, because I still believed teasing could save things. You two seem close. Daniel's response came too fast. She's just a coworker, he said sharply. God, Paige, not everything is a conspiracy. I stared at him. Then why are you angry? I asked softly. He grabbed his phone, shoved it into his pocket, and walked away. That was how our disagreements ended now. Not with resolution. With distance. I kept telling myself it was a phase, a rough patch, stress, midlife restlessness. Anything except the obvious. Because admitting the obvious would mean admitting I'd been standing in front of a burning house, calling it warmth. So when Tony showed me that photo of Daniel on Victoria Dantis's lap, it wasn't the beginning. It was the moment the truth finally got loud enough that I couldn't pretend I didn't hear it. I didn't confront Daniel right away. That surprised me. Old versions of me, the younger, louder ones, would have exploded. Would have stormed into the house swinging questions like weapons, demanding answers, demanding remorse, demanding something that proved I still mattered. But something inside me had gone quiet. Not numb, focused. I finished my shift at the shop that day with mechanical precision. Closed the garage door, washed the grease from my hands until my skin felt raw. Drove home like nothing had changed, even though everything had. I bought beer, I didn't cook, I sat on the couch and waited. At 11:32 p.m., the front door opened. Daniel walked in humming, a soft, careless tune I didn't recognize. His cheeks were flushed, hair slightly messy despite the obvious attempt to fix it. His jacket smelled like that expensive cologne, layered with something warmer. Someone else. Hey, he said, surprised to see me awake. You're up late. I took a slow sip of my beer, keeping my eyes on the dark television screen. How was dinner with your brother? I asked. He froze. Just for half a second. But half a second was enough. Fine, he said quickly. You know how Ethan gets. Had too much wine, complained about his divorce the whole time. I nodded, like I was filing away useless information. That's funny, I said. He shifted his weight. What's funny? I called Ethan around 9, I replied calmly. Asked if you wanted me to pick you up. Silence stretched between us. He said he hasn't seen you in 2 weeks. Daniel's face went through a rapid series of expressions. Confusion, calculation, offense, before settling on anger. Are you checking up on me now? He snapped. What is this, high school? I looked at him then. Really looked. At the man I'd built a life with. At the stranger wearing my husband's face. I'm just making sure my spouse is safe, I said quietly. Especially when he's out with mysterious women who own luxury car dealerships. The color drained from his face. Not denial, not confusion, recognition. For a moment, just a flicker, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I can explain, he started, stepping toward me. I'm sure you can, I said, standing up. But I'm guessing it'll sound a lot like your brother's story. I turned toward the stairs, then paused. Daniel stood in the middle of our living room, suddenly small, guilty. Beautiful in that way broken things sometimes are, right before they shatter completely. The red shirt he was wearing caught my eye. That shirt. It wasn't for family dinners. Hey, I said, looking back at him. Nice outfit. He swallowed. Victoria has good taste. His sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. I went upstairs and closed the bedroom door. Didn't slam it. Didn't cry. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, while I listened to Daniel pace downstairs, probably replaying every lie he'd told, trying to calculate how much I knew and how much damage control he needed to do. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because clarity had finally arrived. My marriage was over, had been for a while. That didn't mean the game was finished. It just meant the rules had changed. The next morning, I woke up alone. The bed was cold on his side, sheets untouched. The house was too quiet. the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and forces you to listen to your own thoughts whether you want to or not. Daniel was gone. On the kitchen counter there was a note, written quickly, like he didn't want to give the words time to betray him. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at it for a long time, my coffee going untouched beside me. Working late. With Victoria and her expensive suits and her hands that had learned my husband's body better than mine had in months. I should have screamed, thrown the mug against the wall, ripped the note in half and set it on fire like some dramatic movie scene. Instead, I folded it neatly and slid it into my pocket because something inside me had shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing. At the shop, I worked in silence. Tony noticed immediately. "You look calm," he said carefully, handing me a wrench. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm contained." He frowned. "That's worse." Maybe. But containment meant control, and control was the only thing that kept me upright. All day, memories kept surfacing, small moments I'd dismissed at the time. Daniel turning his phone face down. Daniel showering the moment he came home. Daniel criticizing my clothes before work dinners. Had I missed the signs because I was naive? Or because I wanted the marriage to survive more than I wanted the truth? That question followed me home. Daniel didn't come back that night, or the next. On the third evening, I heard the garage door open just after 10. I didn't move from the kitchen table. He walked in cautiously, like a guest who knew he'd overstayed his welcome. "Paige," he said softly, "we need to talk." I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat. Up close, I could see the cracks, dark circles under his eyes, tension pulling at his mouth. He looked scared. That should have satisfied me. It didn't. "I never meant for it to happen," he began. I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. "Don't start with intentions. Start with facts." He swallowed. "I met Victoria through work," Daniel said. "At first, it was just business. She made me feel seen, appreciated." I let the words hang there. "And I didn't?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. That hurt more than any confession. "I didn't plan to lie to you," he said. "It just kept going." "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. 6 months. 6 months. 6 months of dinners alone. 6 months of wondering what I'd done wrong. 6 months of slowly shrinking myself to fit into a life he'd already left. "I kept telling myself I'd end it," he whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed then, a short, humorless sound. "You didn't want to hurt me," I repeated. "So you cheated. You lied. You used our money to rent an apartment I didn't know existed." His head snapped up. "How did you—" "I know more than you think," I said, "and less than I'm about to." He reached for my hand. I pulled away. "Paige, please," he said, voice breaking. "We can fix this. Counseling, a fresh start." I looked at him for a long time, at the man who had watched me carry the weight of our life while quietly building an escape plan with someone else. "I've spent my life fixing broken things," I said calmly. "The difference is, machines don't lie to you while you're repairing them." He started to cry then. Real tears. A month ago, they might have stopped me. Now, they just confirmed something I already knew. This wasn't about whether he loved me. It was about whether he respected me. And the answer was already clear. After that night, the house stopped feeling like mine. Daniel moved through it like a ghost, quiet, careful, avoiding my eyes as if eye contact might force accountability. He slept on the couch, left early, came home late. The distance between us became physical, measurable, like an object you could trip over if you weren't careful. I didn't ask where he was going. I already knew. What I hadn't expected was how quickly other people decided this was my fault. It started with his mother. She called on a Wednesday afternoon while I was elbow deep in an engine bay. "Paige," she said, voice tight with forced calm, "Daniel tells me you've been difficult." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Difficult how?" "You're pushing him," she replied, "questioning him, making accusations. You know he's under stress at work." I almost laughed. "Did he mention the affair?" I asked. Silence. Then, He said there were misunderstandings. Of course he did. You've always been very independent, she continued. Sometimes men need to feel supported, not interrogated. There it was. The unspoken rule. Be quieter. Be softer. Be easier to lie to. I supported your son for 15 years, I said evenly. I built a business, paid half the bills, carried the weight when he wanted more than he could earn. If that wasn't enough, the problem isn't my tone. She sighed like I was exhausting. I just don't want to see this family torn apart, she said. Funny how families only mattered when I stopped absorbing the damage. The calls didn't stop there. Daniel's brother sent a text. You're blowing this out of proportion. A mutual friend suggested I was emotionally unavailable. Another hinted that my job made Daniel feel emasculated. Tony was the only one who didn't flinch. They're circling the wagons, he said one night at the shop, handing me a beer. Happens when people don't want to face the truth. I know, I replied. I just didn't expect them to aim at me. But the worst escalation didn't come from words. It came from evidence. I started noticing small financial discrepancies. Withdrawals I hadn't made. Charges from places I'd never been. One night, while Daniel was showering, his laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, unguarded for the first time in months. I hesitated. Then I remembered 6 months of lies. I sat down. What I found wasn't just betrayal. It was planning. Emails, messages, photos, hotel reservations labeled conference, messages laughing about me, about how I'd never notice. Conversations about handling the Paige situation, like I was an obstacle, not a person. My hands shook as I scrolled. This wasn't an accident. It was a campaign. By the time Daniel came downstairs, I'd closed the laptop and memorized everything. You okay? He asked cautiously. I looked at him and felt something detach inside my chest. I'm learning, I said. He frowned. Learning what? How much damage people can justify when they stop seeing you as human. That night, I didn't cry. I organized. Printed copies, saved files, took notes. Because escalation works both ways. And while they were busy blaming me for breaking the marriage, I was finally seeing the full shape of the truth. The night I hit bottom didn't come with screaming or shattered glass. It came quietly. It came with an empty house, a blinking porch light I'd forgotten to turn off, and the sound of my own breathing echoing too loudly in rooms that used to feel full. Daniel didn't come home. Not that night, not the next. By the fourth night, his side of the closet was half empty. Shirts gone, shoes missing. The red travel bag I'd given him for our 10th anniversary vanished like it had never meant anything. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, holding one of his old t-shirts in my hands. It smelled faintly like detergent and something familiar enough to hurt. That's when it hit me. Not anger, not rage, grief. Not just for the marriage, for the version of myself who believed loyalty would be returned in kind. For the woman who thought love meant endurance. I replayed everything in my head, cruel and relentless. If I'd been softer, if I'd dressed differently, if I'd wanted less. The questions stacked up until I couldn't breathe under their weight. I went days without eating properly, forgot to return calls, let Tony run the shop while I told myself I just needed time. One afternoon, I sat alone in the garage after closing, staring at an engine block I'd rebuilt twice already and still couldn't get right. My hands shook. Not from weakness, but from exhaustion. For the first time since this started, I let myself ask the most dangerous question of all. What if this really is my fault? That thought hollowed me out. I went home and poured myself a drink I didn't need, sat on the couch and stared at the wall where our wedding photo used to hang. I'd taken it down without ceremony. The empty space felt like a bruise. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. We need to talk. This has gone too far. Too far. As if the betrayal hadn't already crossed every line first. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. Come get the rest of your things. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. You're being unreasonable, he finally sent. That was it. That was the moment something inside me cracked clean through. I stood up so fast the room spun. My chest felt tight, like grief had finally decided to crush something vital. I walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept the evidence, and stared at the stack of paper like it belonged to someone else's life. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want justice. I wanted the pain to stop. For a brief, terrifying moment, I considered burning it all, letting him walk away, letting everyone believe whatever version made their lives easier. It would have been simpler, but simplicity had cost me 15 years. I sank onto the bed and cried until my throat ached and my face felt swollen. Ugly, shaking sobs that left no room for pride. When I finally ran out of tears, I lay there staring at the ceiling, empty, raw, done. And in that emptiness, something quiet but solid took root. If this was the lowest point, if this was what losing everything felt like, then I had nothing left to protect but myself. The turning point didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It came the morning after I stopped crying. I woke up early, before the alarm, before the grief could get its claws into me again. The house was still. Pale light slipped through the curtains, landing on the floor like it had something to say. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. It felt steady. I made coffee, ate toast. Small things, grounding things. The kind of routine that reminds you you're still alive, even when your world has collapsed. When I got to the shop, Tony was already there, inventory clipboard in hand. He looked up, ready to make a joke, then stopped. "You look different," he said carefully. "I am," I replied. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Around noon, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Paige Hollander?" a woman asked when I answered. "Yes." "This is Ellen Markham. I work in compliance at Meridian Financial, Daniel's company." I stepped into the office and closed the door. She didn't waste time. "We've received an anonymous report regarding one of our senior employees," she said. "Inappropriate conduct, misuse of company resources, conflicts of interest." My pulse stayed calm. "I see. We're in the early stages of an internal investigation," she continued, "but we needed to verify something. Did you know your husband was renting an apartment downtown using joint funds?" I closed my eyes, not in pain, but in recognition. So the truth was already moving without me. "Yes," I said, "I did." There was a pause. "And," she added gently, "are you aware of any relationship between your husband and Victoria Dantas of Dantas Luxury Motors?" The name felt heavy, but no longer sharp. "Yes," I said again, "I'm aware." "Thank you," Ellen said. "That's all for now." When the call ended, I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity. They were looking. People were finally asking the right questions. Later that afternoon, someone else came by the shop. Someone I hadn't expected. Marcy Peterson. She hovered near the entrance, sunglasses still on despite being indoors. Confidence gone. "Paige," she said awkwardly, "do you have a minute?" I crossed my arms. Oil-stained and unapologetic. "What do you want, Marcy?" She swallowed. I didn't realize how bad things were," she said. "Daniel told us you were controlling, cold, that you'd checked out of the marriage." I laughed softly. "Of course he did." Her shoulders slumped. "Victoria isn't who she pretends to be," she whispered. "She's mean. When she doesn't get her way, she talks about people like they're disposable." I studied her face. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," she said quietly, she started talking about replacing Daniel, too. There it was. The final piece. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. "Thank you," I said. "You should probably leave." When she was gone, I sat alone in my office and finally understood something that changed everything. I wasn't losing my life. I was being released from it. Daniel didn't leave because I failed. He left because he wanted something shiny and shallow, and mistook that for worth. And I no longer needed to prove my value to someone who measured love like an upgrade. That night, I sent one message. "I'm filing for divorce. Communicate through a lawyer." Then I turned my phone off. For the first time in 15 years, the future felt like something I owned again. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It unraveled, slowly, publicly, and in ways Daniel couldn't control. The first crack showed up at the shop. Tony came in one morning with his phone already in his hand, jaw tight, eyes sharp. "You see this?" he asked. I shook my head. "Daniel's been suspended," he said. "Meridian Financial. Paid leave pending investigation." I closed the hood of the car I was working on and wiped my hands. "That was fast," I said. Tony studied my face. "You okay?" I thought about it for a moment. "I'm steady," I replied. "That's new." Daniel called that night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail instead, his voice shaky, strained, stripped of its usual authority. "Paige, please. They're tearing everything apart. HR, legal, compliance. Everyone's asking questions. Victoria's not answering my calls. I didn't think it would go this far." I deleted the message without listening to the rest, because this wasn't far. This was exactly where the truth always ends up. A week later, Victoria Dantas made the local news. Nothing dramatic, just a short segment tucked between weather and sports. Dantas Luxury Motors under investigation for irregular city contracts. I stood in my kitchen watching the screen, coffee cooling in my hands. Irregularities, misconduct, pending charges. Daniel texted me that night. "She's ruined. This is spiraling." I stared at the words for a long time. "You spiraled first," I thought. I didn't reply. Then came the silence from Daniel's family. No more lectures from his mother. No more texts telling me to be understanding. No more, "This is complicated." Complications only exist when lies still have oxygen. 2 weeks later, Daniel showed up at the house to collect the last of his things. He looked smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the world had finally stopped cushioning his choices. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said quietly, standing in the doorway. I nodded. "No one ever does." "I lost my job," he added. "Victoria's lawyers won't even talk to me." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Not defensive, just finished. "And?" I asked. He flinched. "I thought maybe we could slow down the divorce," he said. "Figure something out." I met his eyes. "You already figured something out," I said calmly. "You just didn't expect to pay for it." His mouth opened, closed. "I loved you," he whispered. I believed him. And that was the tragedy. "Love without respect is just attachment," I said, "and I don't live on scraps anymore." He left without another word. The house felt lighter after he walked out. Not happy, but breathable. By the time the divorce paperwork was finalized, Daniel had moved in with a friend. Victoria was facing formal charges. The company cut all ties. Her social circle vanished like it had never been real to begin with. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just moved forward. Because the truth has a strange way of doing the work for you if you stop standing in its way. A year later, my life looks quieter. Not smaller, just honest. The shop opens at the same time every morning. The sign still flickers when it rains. The air still smells like oil and metal and work that doesn't pretend to be anything else. I hired another mechanic, took fewer late nights, learned how to go home before exhaustion turned into identity. I sold the house Daniel and I bought together, not out of spite, out of clarity. I didn't want to keep living inside a memory that required me to shrink to fit it. I moved into a smaller place closer to the shop. Fewer rooms, fewer echoes. Mornings where the silence feels like peace instead of abandonment. People sometimes ask if I regret how things ended. The public unraveling, the professional consequences, the way the truth didn't stay private once it surfaced. And here's the thing I've learned. I didn't end my marriage. I stopped protecting a lie. Daniel lost his job because of his choices. Victoria fell because of her greed. I walked away because I finally understood my worth wasn't negotiable. There's a difference between revenge and refusal. I didn't destroy anyone. I just stepped out of the way and let reality do what it always does, correct the imbalance. Some nights I sit on my porch with a beer and watch the sun drop behind the buildings. Tony comes by. We talk about engines, about plans, about nothing important and everything that matters. I don't feel bitter. I feel intact. And if there's one lesson I hope someone listening takes with them, it's this. Love should never require you to disappear. Loyalty should never demand your silence. And clarity, even when it hurts, is a gift. Some things can be fixed. Others don't need repair. They need release. And when you finally let go of what's broken beyond repair, you make room for a life that doesn't ask you to bleed just to belong.